Hey.
Hello.
Hey, welcome.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the As Above, So Below podcast. My name is Dean Cottiel.
I'm Konrad and Dean.
And welcome to episode 3.
So, what are we talking about today, Dean?
Transformation, Konrad.
Transformation.
As a psychologist, without sounding like a wife who wonders whether her husband will ever change, will he ever pick up his socks? Do people change? Can we change? Does a leopard ever change its spots?
Love that saying. Yeah. Well, if you think about it, it's probably one of the most eternal questions we get asked. Can somebody actually change? And what is change? You know, so if we think about it, we're talking about transformation, and it sounds like a hell of a nice word, but actually what we're talking about is change. Can people change? What does it look like? Can they change psychologically? Can they change in any other way? Are we missing the point? Is change at all something that we should be looking at? Is something I'm thinking about.
As a clinical psychologist of 30 years, you've seen hundreds, thousands of people, extended periods of time. Without putting you on the spot, can we change? Do we change? Is it in our makeup to go through a process of transformation? Does that happen?
You know, I think what's important for us to discuss, and if I think about what people see and the questions they ask, there's different forms of therapy. Like there's different forms of things out there in the world these days. What is it that causes change? And for me, I do long-term psychotherapy. And if you really think about it, change isn't possible. We talk about spontaneous change. But I think what we don't see is the lead-up to change that takes place over a long period of time. And sometimes we have experiences that cause a sudden shift. There's a Greek word called metanoia. And I like to think about that, and then there's another one called enantiodromia, and it's the I see you smiling, so you know it, New Testament stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So the change that takes place, the radical transformation of a human being, and then also the enantiodromia is moving from one opposite to the end. So it happens. We've got words for these things, and we see it so often. Getting back to it, in terms of therapy, I believe that long-term psychotherapy or a relationship with another person, where knowing yourself, delving into things, into your psyche, understanding yourself, and allowing, based on what we spoke about in our last podcast, allowing the space for faith to come in, for the unknown to emerge.
Yeah. And, I think about, from a Christian perspective, we're talking about transformation, but I wonder if we take a step back from that and almost just look at the word formation. And I wonder what it means for us to be formed on a regular basis. Because I think we, and helping with language here, I think we're all being formed whether we like it or not. We're being formed into something. Now the media, the world that we live in today, social, digital, online spaces, we're receiving information on a regular basis more than any generation prior to this. So we're taking on information, and that information is actually changing us. We're being formed into something. So the moment we started talking about this topic, and we were touching on it a little bit earlier and thinking about it during the week, I think we're all being formed into something, whether we're aware of it or not. There are these visible and invisible forces at play that are changing us into something. Now I wonder if we are aware of those things or not. And I wonder what happens when we become aware of those things, the ones that we are intentional about, and the ones that we are not intentional about. I think then we begin to go, okay, this is stuff that I want, this is stuff that I don't want. And then I begin to consciously move in a direction of what it means to be transformed into something. So I wonder, the question that I have in my mind is, whether you're a Christian or not, or whether you're a religious person or not, or whether you're a person of faith or not, what is your highest value? And how does that influence what it means for you to change in a particular direction? Because if that is the highest thing, like that is the thing that I'm striving for, and I'm looking up almost as this is the highest rung of the ladder. How do I move in that direction? Because that is the thing that I want to be formed in the most. On a physical level, I look at, I'm stuck in this CrossFit game at the moment, and I'm stuck at watching all these guys in the CrossFit Open, and guys are getting ready for quarterfinals now. I say guys because not me. But I look at Matt Fraser, or I look at Danielle O'Brien in the girls section. I look at, these are the guys that are up there. So every action that I take on a CrossFit level, going to training 3-4 times a week, joining at the box, that is what I'm moving towards. And hopefully, because that is my highest good, that is my highest goal, that my body will begin to transform because I'm on that road. Now we can unpack that, I guess, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally. Where are you going in the formation of your life?
Yeah. It's a hell of an interesting thing to watch what's happening out there in the world at the moment. And there's this massive split. And again, I want to come back to, we've spoken about some of the feedback that we got, and the necessity and the need that people have to engage with what you said earlier on, with parts of themselves. And in my world, I think the way I describe it is we've got unconscious dynamics. We've got things that are unseen all the time that's informing us.
Sure.
What's below the waterline? How big is that iceberg? I mean, you've been there. How big is the iceberg underneath the waterline?
Yeah.
What is that? And coming back to thinking about the name of our podcast, As Above, So Below. So we talk about physical things, or we talk about what the split is in the world these days, that we go towards mastery. We have this ideal about what it is that I should become. And I think it's a very careful process to be able to listen to the unconscious, to listen to what it is that's driving us, and that it's not just a holding on. So if I stop there for a moment, then we're holding on to old structures, old ways of being all the time. And for me, transformation is about, it's a continual dynamic process of breaking down the old, bringing in the new. Again, political example, I was chatting to my son this morning and saying to him, it is fascinating. Amnesty International this morning on the radio, I hear they want to talk about, they want to know how many pit toilets are still in South Africa, and what is the government doing about changing that? Now, if I transferred that, Amnesty International, I remember as a 10, 11-year-old listening to Amnesty International, and they're raging about the apartheid government. Here we are again. It's full circle. So the actual structure, and what you're talking about, I think, is the ideal, the ethic, the real ethic of what is the ethic of change, what is the essence of what it is that we're trying to search for and reach for. It cannot be a physical thing, but it does manifest there. And if we think about our podcast, As Above, So Below, you cannot have external change as above if it doesn't change on the inside. And of course, it's no good just changing things on the inside. It has to manifest on the outside. So as above, in this world, it has to be below. It has to be that iceberg below.
Yeah. Yeah. So the transformation, if you take 2 steps back again, so things are being formed, these structures that you speak about, whether we know about them or we don't know about them, so conscious or subconscious. Help me. So we then, some of those are changed. In other words, that transformation takes place. But in that changing, some of those structures then need to be reformed.
Yeah.
So that, it's almost like that cycle has to go full circle, to talk about your Amnesty International example. Like, unless those structures are reformed, I'm just going to go back to the same thing, like every time. Unless there is a new structure that is built up. So the wife who's complaining about her husband and his socks, the husband, there needs to be and now I'm thinking about this, I was about to say the reformation, going back to the 1600s of what happened to the church. There was a reformation that needed to take place. So the transformation happened within the lives of those Christians. The Reformation happened with John Wesley and Calvin and all the men who, Germany and everything, and Wesley and everything else that went with that. But there was a genuine reformation of the structures so that transformation and formation and new formation could take place in those systems. Because the old systems were no longer working. So do we then have this transformation that takes place in our lives? And I mean, is it a continual thing? Is it something that's happening all the time?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very good question.
Because in my, now my marketing brain is starting to ask some questions. Because I'm constantly inundated with information in the marketing world, I'm constantly being forced, encouraged to change certain things. That's advertising. Right? Convince me that I need to change. Convince me that I need this thing in order to get the thing that I think I want. So I will go through this process of change. So I have this ideal in my mind in terms of what it looks like. And so from a ministry point of view, from a Christian point of view, to take it down a level, deeper level, Paul talks about being transformed into the image of Christ. So there is this Christ-likeness that I'm moving towards. So that's the ideal that I'm moving towards, right? That is this idealized picture, vision that I have. So 1 + 1 is 2, and I need to ensure that I'm moving in the direction to get as close to 2 as possible to ensure that I'm changing, in inverted commas, in the right direction. Because otherwise I'm leaving it to chance.
So there is no chance, and I think that's why people often think that there's some kind of predestination, because in some way there is, right? If I look at what Carl Jung described as the development process based on Freud's initial model, and then he evolved it, he understood that when we get born, we are born with what he called the capital S self. Put a capital S because it's not just the identity of the person. So to distinguish that, there's this inherent, if you will, authentic self. Now it's got nothing to do with being authentic. We say, are you being false or are you being authentic? It's a far deeper, what he called archetypal structure that is the seed or the kernel with which we are born. And as we get born, and the development of life, and these days we understand it even starts in the pre-birth intrauterine phase. Everything that we experience, all the physical and emotional and social vicissitudes, the things that happen to us in life have an impact. And of course these days we also know that there's genetics, epigenetics involved, and that all has an impact on us that starts to shape our personality. And we've got to adapt to life. We've got to adapt to a lot of negative experiences around us. So as we do that, we develop the sense of I, and that is the ego. The sense of personality, the executive functioning, the way we think about ourselves, our sense of identity, and who, if you had to write an essay about who do I identify as me, and you had to write, this is Dean, this is Konrad, and you write it about yourself, it would be your ego. And that ego has to develop, because that's the engagement with the world, the sense of your personality. But of course, as you go along, there's things that develop by necessity to adapt to the world around you that moves you further and further away from this original template. Okay? So the ego and the self, there's an understanding that there's this axis between the two, and they start to separate, right? And somewhere along life, usually around about 40 midlife or so, you're almost there. Maybe that's why you started this podcast, right?
Sure.
So you start to feel the reverberations of the self. And there's a sense that something isn't quite working. The old ways of coping in the world, or identity, and the example I often, quite laughingly use, I lived in Cape Town for many years, and loved going to Camps Bay, beautiful beach, grab a beer, sit there, sun goes down late, and then you sit there on a Friday night and you see these guys, and my apologies to anybody who actually has this in a healthy personality, but you see these guys come past in they're all about 50, 60 years old, you know, maybe a slightly bit younger. They in a convertible, and they've got a 20-year-old girlfriend or wife. And you look at them, and you know, not to stereotype that, but to me that was the image of, I want to be young again. I want to go back. I want to redo this. I want to, and it's very important in our discussion here, I want to redo this. I want to reform myself. And I think the task is, based on what we spoke about last week as well with faith, is that there is a breakdown of the old structures.
Yeah.
And there's pertinent times in your life
because they don't work anymore.
They don't work.
Yeah.
So it has to break down in order to get to the deeper side.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you guys in the ministry is all about. Is about drawing people to teach them how to listen to the self.
And is that because of coping in the world? Dealing with the world? The structures that are built up as a child no longer work?
It's, you know, that's the developmental part. Of course, these kind of things happen all the time. We adapt all the time. It's not just in midlife, it's also in adolescence. It's right through our lives that is existing things. Marriages break down. Jobs break down. We don't. It doesn't work anymore. Relationships come to an end. Political parties have their time in government. So we see this ever-going cycle that we go through. And last week we spoke about nostalgia. You know, and I think nostalgia is a way of bring back the good old days because they were better, and it's a longing for going back to the safety of the previous structures.
Yeah. A big catchphrase in the church, kind of coined by Brian Houston, who's kind of going through his own stuff at the moment. The best is yet to come. And I've always liked that phrase, and it's kind of really been popularized in the church circles. But if I genuinely believe that my best days are ahead of me, you know, as a father, God willing, as a grandfather, you know, if the best days are ahead of me, because the alternative is frightening. If the best days are behind me, then I'm just dying. Then what's the point?
So what is the best days? That's what I want to ask.
Yeah.
Is it you're gonna make more money?
Yeah.
You're gonna be better, or is it a deepening?
Yeah.
And that's it, isn't it? It's a deepening process.
Yeah. With myself, and I think I must again, you know, if I jump into the ministry thing, it must be with myself as well as other people. It has to be. I think when I look at Jesus and when I look at his life, and without talking too much about, transcendence and what it means to go deeper, or in some language or in some cultures or in some traditions to go higher, into that higher self, Richard Rohr would say it is transcendence and including. And if you haven't included, you haven't transcended. And so I wonder how much of that stuff means I'm able to go deeper because I'm able to include more of the world in my life. Because a 13-year-old doesn't look at a 6-year-old and go, haha, you can't even kick a ball. Like, I wouldn't talk to the 6-year-old me with that tone. Because I know that I've got so much more growing up to do. So I often find myself falling into this trap that the moment you started talking about that 50, 60-year-old guy walking around with a 20-year-old dolly under his arms in the convertible, I went straight to judgment. Like, judging this oak, he doesn't know any better, like, he's just got to get a life, I wish he would grow up.
Yeah.
Like, there's no... The higher self, Dean, and now I'm beginning to kind of touch on what God's grace needs to do more in my life, is actually he just doesn't know better yet. He doesn't know better yet, and it is actually my role to be gracious and kind enough to go, I was there. And I know what it's like to be ignorant of what could be deeper or better or more than what he is currently experiencing.
Yes, indeed. There's something actually so tragic about that. So tragic when we see another soul struggling. I know I made a joke of it, and actually it's so tragic because what you highlight is that there's relationship and there's community and there's collective. If one of us, and I think about Ubuntu, I am because we are, that there's a collective sense that if somebody is not transforming in our collective, in our community, then it touches us.
Yeah.
It's also all of us
yeah.
that is blocked. And there's another thing about this that I wonder about. You mentioned relationship, and you've mentioned a couple of times in the podcasts the importance of Jesus' life in relationship. And I wonder, the relatability aspect. In the Jungian world, we call it the Eros dynamic, right? Eros is relatability. It's associated with the erotic for good reason, because it is about a union. It's connecting at a very fundamental, deep way with other human beings. And it's this...
Intimate, huh?
It's very intimate, and it's this moment of ecstasy that is spiritual, where I'm able to relate and have an empathy and connect to another human being, instead of having these layers and layers that we block, and we have this pretense of Dale Carnegie, let's learn how to actually pretend to connect, rather than a genuine opening of your parts of yourself. And I think to open this up, the church, in my experience, has fallen prey to a large extent to a very masculine orientated perspective, and not done enough to open up the possibility of what it's like to relate, to open up the Eros factor. I know it's enshrined, I know the images are there, I know many people in the church that grasp that and they grapple with that, but I'm talking about as a whole, as a movement. it's been very hierarchical in terms of church structures and being in a church.
Yeah.
It preaches it, but it doesn't
No, it doesn't.
live it.
I'll never forget one thing you said to me. I was talking about belonging and believing and the difference between those two things. And in our conversation, you unlocked something in me that really has sent my mind and my heart down a rabbit hole almost. And I asked something along the lines of, do we create these communities where belonging exists first and then we worry about what people believe? Or do we have to constantly force people to believe a thing so that they would then belong? And I'm not sure if you remember what you said to me around this idea of the masculine and the feminine.
I can't quite, no.
And you said, well, the believing is a masculine part of the same coin where belonging is the feminine part.
Oh, no.
And you see, I think what you're touching on now for me from a Christian church point of view is we've often thought that hierarchical means masculine. When they're not the same thing. There is actually a beauty and a divine masculinity that should exist in the church. But what we've done is we've created a hierarchy. And those two things aren't actually the same. And we've gone and created in the last 2,000-3,000 years within the church this idea that it needs to be patriarchal. When actually, no, we are, as we would read in Genesis, created in God's image, both male and female. Genetically, we know that I am 50% my mom and 50% my dad. And yes, we can, and on a chromosome level I'm talking. So there is both. But what we've done now in today's, forgive me, please don't email me, woke area, woke era of what it means to have pronouns, we have fallen on a different identity because we're almost on the other side of the spectrum going, well, the hierarchy didn't work. And so what we've done is we've removed the feminine. But if you have a look at Jesus, who was, when it comes to dealing with people on a relational level, 2,000 years ahead of his time, his Jewish roots or traditions didn't help him with this, but how did he include women so much? How did he do that? 2,000 years ahead of his time. His Jewish roots didn't help him with that because that was patriarchal. Men were supposed to be running everything. But yeah, we have Jesus including women in the story. So, without us digressing too much, I think we're still talking about transformation and what it means to change. And I wonder on a Christian level what it means for us to do that in community. It is incredibly sad, as you were saying. Tragic, I think was the word that you used, on a soul level, to see another person, I don't want to use the word diminished, lacking, help me here, when they are living that way. That we need to go on a community level, Ubuntu as you're talking. It takes a village to raise a child. We need elders to help us raise our kids. We need grandparents to help raise our kids. But what we've done, and I'm to blame, we in South Africa especially, I'll never forget, I had a friend from the UK who came down to visit. He's part of the 24/7 prayer movement, full toggle. First thing he said to me when he arrived in South Africa was, the walls around your houses are high.
Yeah.
And so I've always had this idea, and his voice reverberating in the back of my mind. We've created higher walls and smaller tables. That's what we've done.
That's a beautiful concept, eh? And I think it links up with the idea that walls are there to differentiate, to push out, and that's the patriarchal. Tables are there as feminine entities around which we gather.
Yeah.
We hold ourselves there. And I think about what you said there about the elders. And I want to go back to that for a moment. Because for us to genuinely transform and open up the possibilities of both the masculine and feminine aspects. So what are we talking about? The ability to go out into the world and to create things, to break boundaries, to build, to have ideas, to come up with that. Outside of the comfort zones, in other words, to create new structures, is part of that masculine activity. But we can't do that unless we have the nurturing unconscious that we sit with of the unknown mystery. That part that we rely on, that is the womb of our own sense of self. If we don't hold that, and the balance between that, to be open to that, and to allow the two to intertwine and to mix, that I think is the ultimate goal for all of us. But you see, all of us have been cut off from these different parts of ourselves. And so I think the ultimate transformation that the church is the bridge to is to allow the existing structures that no longer work to be opened up, to fragment in such a way that it allows that light through, the proverbial light through the broken vase. And if we're going to start to allow that, then we start to open up this self that I spoke about. Experiences of the noumenal, the unknown, the mystery, the parts of ourselves that are there. So how do we do that? And that is where we have mediating relationships and we have mediating symbols in our world. And the Christian cross is not just a symbol that's sitting there. If it's just sitting there, it's dead. If we don't understand what that is doing to us and the relationship we have to that symbol, I'm pointing here as if it's hanging in front of a church. And the symbol of the cross is a very important one because it shows, firstly, the possibility of us dying and then resurrecting in this life. The psychological transformation that we go through, whatever we believe might happen then to us later on in life, we have gone through a resurrection of dying to ourselves. And that to me is the essential part that I take in terms of psychological growth, and we have to die. And we have to believe in the possibility of, as we said last week, of faith and the resurrection of a part of ourselves.
Do you think it's possible to do that independent of other people? I'm reminded, no man is an island.
I think it's impossible.
I think so too.
Dean, can I ask you there, as a minister in the Christian church, in comparison, you see yourself to some Eastern traditions, and this idea of that we have of going to sit in a hole in a mountain or on top of a mountain, and you're on your own, you're meditating for 20 years, and then you find God. That essential message is that you become egoless. And I don't know if that's possible, at least not here in the West. I think it's necessary to find our own identity, hold that, and at the same time as a vantage point, experience this other mysterious dynamic in the world. Spiritual, soulful part. We can only do that. And we can only do that in relationship when we have a mirror. In marriage, in friendships, a best friend.
Community,
Yeah.
Because I think you're 100% right. I think, and I think we'll get more into this, I think in part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of transformation. I think when there are always 3 parts at play. There is and if we were to imagine a tricycle, the front wheel of the tricycle is my lived experience in life. That is my lived experience, day-to-day stuff. Then the 2 wheels that exist on either side of the tricycle, the first wheel is, from a Christian perspective, would be the Holy Spirit in community. In other words, myself in community, if you prefer that language. And then the third one is what tradition I find myself a part of. Now, my lived experience is one thing. And I can have a certain opinion about anything. But the question is, does my community agree with that thing? And does the tradition that I find myself a part of agree with that thing? Now, all of a sudden, we've got different... I can't just believe a thing. Because for the sake of my life, I've spent 10 years on the mountain, I think this is the truth. Because then anybody can believe anything. Which we know to be true. We, again, please don't email me, live in a woke world where I can believe my truth is the truth. And to a certain degree, sure, I get it. But the moment we surround ourselves with, from a Christian perspective, the Holy Spirit in community, and we begin to ask our elders, and we begin to ask our brothers and our sisters, we begin to ask the other people in our community, hey man, what do you think? That's when the elder in the community goes, come walk with me for a bit. I want to show you a couple of other rivers and streams and mountains that I've climbed that I think will show you a different perspective. The sage goes, come walk with me a little bit. Let me... Because our tradition is a whole other part of this equation that goes, what is our tradition? I'm not a man alone here. I am part of generations worth of people who believe and have believed certain things for hundreds, 200s, 1,000, 2,000 years.
Such a difficult word, that tradition. Because these days it holds the idea, and I think rightfully so, that it holds old structures that have become stale. And I say that because I know that's not what you mean. I think tradition for me is there is a huge amount of knowledge that's within us. It's for us to connect to that and find that. But at the same time, we need rituals and people that have walked the path before. That's why the idea of a medicine man that has gone through a hell of a difficult time in his life, he's the guy that you're going to go to. You know, you're not going to go to some minister who has just come out of university and knows nothing about life, and you say, well, I've got a problem here. Can you help me? You want to go to the guy that has walked that path, he's haggard from it, but he's come through the other side. And it's those people, the elders you speak about, that performs, I think, one of the most missing parts for our youth, and that is initiation.
Jeepers.
The process of a ritualistic guiding through
rite of passage,
You know, it's like it's a birth passage into a new way of experiencing ourselves, and it's a passage to allow us to break down the existing way of being, thoughts, ideas, feelings, living way, and then moving into a new way of being. And yes, man, it requires so much courage these days
big time.
to take it on. Because as you were saying, that's why I said tradition. Because to go against something, and you've done that, your story in life is you've done that. You've gone through a period where you had to walk away from a huge group of people that were not believing what and you had to stand up for a minority group and show courage. You know, and that is massive, but you cannot do that unless you truly know and believe in what you are moving towards, and you've got a feeling, and whether physically there or imaginary, you've got elders that are holding you. And as above, so below. Those elders are sometimes in the world with us, and sometimes They are in the books,
Mm.
in the people, in the people within us
Mm.
that hold us and guide us through that process.
Sure. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
The world is lacking elders, people who have walked the walk,
Yeah.
you know, who have tradition, like you're saying, does have a very has got a bit of a bad rap. You know, I mean, even personally, I remember as a young 19-year-old youth pastor, you know, I had all the answers. Don't any Methodist minister come and try and tell me how I'm supposed to run my services, because I think I know everything. And what was to blame? Tradition, because the tradition. But as I've hopefully, gracefully, aged a little bit, shout out to Olivia, the artist. I think the Reformation is an interesting example of people's lived experience was suggesting something new was happening, and the Holy Spirit in a particular community said, whoa, we're going to change something, and that changed tradition. Because the move was so strong that transformation actually took place. That there was genuine transformation. And that's on a large systemic level. But that can happen within our communities, within our churches, and I think what we're saying, within ourselves.
And to add to that, and again, I'll reiterate you, don't email me. It's the problem with the work culture.
Yeah.
Is I'm not allowed to question. And there's a big difference between being allowed to question and not having respect.
Sure. Yeah.
So we are not saying that we don't like work culture because, you know, bugger that, we can ask what we want to.
So do you think that's because, to go back to the divine masculine and divine feminine, do you think that's because we haven't allowed our communities to know that people belong regardless?
I think it comes down to, for me, I feel that there's an inherent connection to ourselves, on the one hand, that we need to grapple with parts of ourselves that we haven't accepted. As above, so below. So that's within ourselves. And within our communities, that'll be a reflection as well. We need to break the barriers of exclusion and include people.
Mm.
We can do that by questioning things. We ask questions to break the barriers and the boundaries and the structures that exclude people. We have to learn to include.
Mm.
And we have to include, you know, for me, as a psychotherapist, it's about challenging the shadow. It's about allowing yourself to grapple and understand your own parental complexes and how there are parts of you that are dissociated into the unconscious. And it's about constantly weaving in, like a beautiful, beautiful Persian rug.
Right, yeah.
You're weaving those parts back into your life so that the growth towards transformation and wholeness is a continual process guided by forces without and within.
Mm. So that's that mirror you look at, the relationships, the spouse.
And very importantly, as we said, I think the transcendent image, the symbol that allows us to unlock, because we're not just conscious beings, we're unconscious as well, and it allows us to work with part of ourselves by meditating on the symbol to unlock unconscious parts to ourselves.
Yeah. From a Christian perspective, I think, if I may say, it's a prayer, it's a contemplation on show me things or show me parts of myself that I haven't seen. You know, shine light on those dark places. That's where the transformation takes place, when I'm moving closer towards that Christ-likeness, and dare I say it, the capital C, the capital S self, the capital C Christ likeness of who I was made to be, my true self. But I mean, we kind of say that with a smile on our face. That's not lacquer. Most of the time, that's not great. I don't want to see that stuff. I don't want to.
And it is difficult, Dean.
Super difficult.
This is the suffering of Christ. I always think about is that the move towards transformation can only take place if it is a painful process.
Yeah.
Because it's painful to lose the existing structures,
Yeah. I mean, I think we don't use this lightly. I mean, we're coming to Easter, so I think we'll touch on some of these things. But it's a death. It is a dying. It is not nice at all. It is terrible.
Going gently is not a palatable feeling always, is it?
Yeah.
And I think then the answer has to be that can people change? Yes. True transformation is a possibility, but it requires a great amount of work. It requires a working with the active symbols in your life. It requires a consciousness. It requires a reaching out to community and elders. And it requires a choosing, a conscious choosing of people in your life that help you mirror that process and help you activate that. And it also means that you suffer the times that there are great aloneness and introspection and introversion of that process. So I think that's where we are now, in the middle of March, heading towards the middle of March, heading towards Easter 2023. I think it's going to be interesting to start talking about the symbolism of Easter, Christ, Passover, and the resurrection, and what that means for us for spiritual and soul psychological growth. I'm looking forward to discussing a couple of ones with you.
Yeah.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening. As always, it's wonderful to share this time with you and really wonderful to have these conversations. So please follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, As Above, So Below Podcast. We're live on all podcast streaming applications, Apple as well as Spotify, and we're on YouTube. So please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and we'd love to hear from you. As Konrad was saying, as we continue this conversation, as we go into Easter, I think this is going to be part one of a few.
Maybe 1,000.
Maybe 1,000. We talk about transformation, what it means to change, what it means to die to self, what it means to follow Jesus on one hand, if I may say so.
Yes, absolutely.
All the way to the cross. Or as Carl Jung would say, what does it mean to look at the shadow?
And what is transformation ultimately about? And how do we engage with that?
Yeah.
So follow us, and hopefully we can let you travel on this journey with us. Yeah. And we can discuss more of our own transformation as well.
Have a wonderful week. Chat to you soon.
Cheers.